So here's a little thumbnail sketch out of my sketchbook. Probably measures about 3 inches in width, a little marker and pen sketch. And what I thought I would do is demo for you how to do a proper water reflection. And even though it looks like it's going to be a pretty straightforward, simple one, there's a couple little things you need to watch out for. So I'm going to start just by doing a little cleanup on this. Typically I would do the water reflection at the end of a rendering. But in this case, I wanted to jump right to what the lecture in the course is about, which is doing reflective surfaces. So I'm just going to clean up really the area around the water, and then we're going to go in and selectively pull out elements from the scene and mirror those into the water plane. So this is all water in the foreground with the exception of that little sliver of S-shaping sand through there, or dirt. And what I'm trying to do here is just clean up the intersection of the water to the foreground and for the architecture, and thinking about how where those elements are going to be in space. And the reason I would usually do the reflection last is that you would get all the colors and textures out of the architecture and all the elements that you've painted. In this case, we're just going to have a rough, marker sketch reflected into the water, but it's all the exact same steps. And we will finish the water part. In fact, I'll finish it actually in color as well. So all I did there was pull the architectural elements, foreground elements, off the background. And the reason for that was that I need to pull everything that's going to reflect into the water and put it on a separate layer. And it's going to be by far the simplest way to do this construction. So I'm grabbing the lasso tool and I'm just going around and I'm just going to delete the water off of that layer that I made. So I'm just selecting it and then deleting. And I'm going to do the same for the silhouette. And here I'm trying to pay a little bit of attention to the perspective. So it's quite a long lens actually, slow perspective convergence, and that whole section back there to the left half of that architecture is kind of in 1-point perspective, and so I can just use the straight line right across the bottom of that intersection to the water. And then this comes a little bit into the foreground, that wall over there, along this pond or lake or whatever it is, and so I'm trying to clean that up a bit and make sure it's in perspective. And then there's another foreground element there to the right, that little triangle shaped rock or whatever wall, and that's a little bit closer even. So I'm trying to set up a few overlaps to change and make the reflection a little bit more complex and a little bit more accurate, in that there's going to be, I think, hopefully for you, a couple of surprises that you might not have guessed about how to do this reflection. So first step, I need to clean up the thing I'm going to reflect. And I'm really just cleaning up the silhouette and just using an eraser. And that's about it. So this is a little tedious. I sped it up through this section. There's various speed ups and slowdowns throughout all my lessons for you guys, so that I can try to squeeze more content into the 2-hour target, and really to speed up the tedious stuff more than anything. So now I'm just refining my silhouette of that piece of architecture. I don't know what it is, but some sort of sci-fi something. And now this building that I'm outlining here, this silhouette, I'm imagining that that's some sort of architecture, but it's way, way in the distance. So that's one of the interesting things we're going to reflect. We're going to see if that reflects into this foreground lake or not. I saw this kind of as a little spaceship landed up there. There's like a little landing pad on top of that building. And it's kind of, that's the front there. It's like a front 3/4 view. And I'm not going to go into detail, but that's in my mind. That's what I saw. It was a little ship landed up there. And refining my silhouette. Almost done. Essentially all we really need to do to mirror this into a flat plane, right, is to take all that architecture and flip it vertically. The challenge becomes in knowing where do you flip it on itself. So that's where we need to do a little bit of construction. Once you know the technique, then it's going to be quite simple. It's one of the easiest and most fun things to do. I love putting water into my big scenes and adding a little bit of reflectivity here and there. And it's really easy to do when you have a low camera point of view like this, because all you really need to do is just flip vertically your pieces of architecture or anything poking up off of that that water plane. Flip it vertically and then adjust the perspective. So sometimes, like if I flip that building, for instance, if I was going to do it very accurately, I'd start to see the underside of that little cantilevered area much more than I do in this perspective. But the lower the angle, meaning the lower your eye level, more parallel you are to that reflective plane, whether it's water or tile floor or anything, the less perspective correction you'll have to do. So that's why the low angle like this is kind of the freebie one. So I'm just finishing the cleanup there. I'm imagining there's some sort of bridge, sort of walkway or something coming out of the bottom of that building, the cantilevered one with the ship on top that's leading over to that other structure. Okay, I think that's getting pretty close. I'm not going to bother to clean up the sky much other than just doing a big gradation. So I put a layer above my background layer, add a little atmosphere way in the distance, and that'll just clean up our sky. And really that's the only part that's going to reflect. We're not going to see it because we run out of picture plane on this one. So now I'm going to select my architectural elements. So I'm going there and making some selections off of my base layer. Really not off the base layer, I'm sorry, off of the one where I had the cleaned up architecture. And so if we were going to mirror this, right, we could draw a little box, and what I want to do is take that height and I just want to mirror it right into that water plane. So we could do our foreshortening method across. We can find those points and mirror them into that plane. And then that would be the height back there, so we have that perspective. So you could draw it like this and redraw the whole thing, but in the case of this long camera lens, we can probably just flip it and get away with it. Now if that notch that I just drew there, that section, right, you can see how it could start to be hidden by the foreground element. So if that notch and that section goes back a long ways, we actually won't see the top part of that reflecting. It'll be blocked by the lower wall. So that's the sort of thing you would want to do to double check. And if you knew that those three triangle elements at the top of the wall were a long ways back, then we might not see those. But in this case, they're fairly close, so I'm going to keep them in there. I'll probably try to squeeze them a little bit. Just try to position that wall. So what you do is, what I did there was I just flipped it vertically. I put the center of my selected box at one point that was already touching itself, and then I just distorted. What I'm going to do here is just going to pull that and compress it a bit, because that section is back a little further behind that low wall. So by doing that, it's setting it a little bit behind that lip, behind the edge. There we go. And in fact, I will take and push back that little element right there. So that maybe is the top of another structure way in the distance. And so here, we wouldn't see it because it's too far behind the top of this wall. So then there's a little tweak to it. So just cleaning up the silhouette of the foreground element. I'm going to do the same thing again here, darken it up a bit. I'm now going to pull it into the reflection layer. So I'm going to duplicate it and flip vertical. Position it. I'm going to set up one point that touches, and I'm going to put the center line on that point, and then I'm going to distort it into perspective to match the perspective on that water plane. And then I lifted it up a little bit, and the reason why is that there's a little angle for a little dirt or sand where that leans in to the water. We probably wouldn't see that reflecting, so you want to lift the reflection up a little bit because really it's reflecting a little further behind that sand area, the big architectural element. Just cleaning up behind that so we can see the silhouette a little bit. Technically that should of course be in my reflection, but again, it's not a finished rendering that I'm mirroring, it's just a sketch, but you'll see it starts to come to life in a little bit. So I'm going to grab this element, and this is the bigger piece of architecture, and I'm separating it off for that left hand little island. I'm thinking that's a little bit in front of that element. The rest of this architecture is kind of almost on one plane. It's kind of one point. It maybe doesn't have a lot of depth to it, so just cleaning up the silhouette a bit, and I'm going to pull that off of its background, so I'm erasing that light gray, which was that building and stuff in the distance. So redefine that silhouette, and then I'm going to mirror that. So again, duplicate the layer and flip vertical, position it back on itself. There you go, and that's the reflection of a perfectly still water. So it's basically you're just doing chrome first, and you know, is it just like the previous lessons where we're going to do chrome, then we're going to introduce layer mask and render our Fresnel effect, and that's basically all there is to it. Of course, because it's water, we're going to do a little, you know, a few ripples and things. So there, I'm going to position that. That looks to be right sitting on that plane, and pull that down just a tick because there's a little perspective on that, like maybe that thing's coming towards us a bit. Again, you know, pretty loose perspective. It's just a thumbnail sketch out of my sketchbook that we're mirroring, but it's got all the good stuff for reflectivity that's going to happen. So there's some. All right, now it's looking like chrome, and I'm just going to consolidate a couple of these reflections into the same layer. So a little layer cleanup. And what I need to do is the buildings that are way in the distance, we need to figure out, do we see those reflecting or not? So there's the horizon line. Just put a couple of guides in there from my original sketch. So there's the horizon, and let's put a little, maybe a little structure out there, and then just a quick reflection of it. So it's like glass way off there in the distance, becoming that little strip of land with another building. Okay, just organizing my layers. I'm putting my reflection below my structure layer because I want that, the land, because it has a clean edge and a clean silhouette, it can sit on top of the water. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to figure out, do we see the reflection of those buildings that are way in the distance? Like that could be a city, you know, cityscape or something way over there. So what you do is you first figure out where is the water intersecting the bottom of your shape. So I'm saying it's way over there, and that's where it's intersecting the bottom of our shape. And then that's where it hits, my vertical would rest on the water plane, and then I would double the height into it. So that's all we need to do. And you, of course, you could, you know, measure it with a ruler in this case, or you could, you know, draw a rectangle and draw the X, right, and find the center line and foreshorten that across into the ground plane or the water plane. And so what I need to do now is I need to pull those buildings, those light buildings, off of my architecture layer. Okay, and then I need to clean those up as their own separate silhouette. And then we're going to mirror that into the water behind this cantilevered building, and we'll see what we get. So I'm just cleaning up that, I'm just continuing the shapes behind my architecture, my foreground elements. Okay, and then that's the bottom of it. That's where it's going to sit on itself. And now I've got to erase out. So first I had to extend the gray, and now I'm going to continue the silhouette behind my cantilever building. So there we go, almost done. And then we're just going to mirror that. So there's the cleaned up layer, and mirror it, touch it back onto itself. And that's where the reflection of those tall buildings would go. So there's the surprise, and that's the interesting thing by doing it properly. As it goes off into the distance and into perspective, we see the building above the top of the cantilevered building in our perspective. But when I look at the reflection, the tops of the buildings are actually hidden by the reflection of our cantilevered building. And that's because there are different places on that perspective plane. In the foreground, right, that reflection of the cantilevered building started much lower than the reflection of the cityscape that's way in the distance. And the net result is that it's like cut out cardboard elements, and they're placed in different places, and so when they overlap, the perspective influences that as they go back in the distance. So makes for a much more convincing reflection. Okay, all I've done now is taken and made a water layer. I just paint bucket filled from the horizon down, basically, or from that little strip of land with the little building in the distance, down and all the way to the bottom of the picture. And I colorized it, made it green. So now I'm painting the water without the reflection. So you just imagine it's a little bit transparent. So the deeper pools has more of the silt and dirt and whatever sediment or whatever's in the water that's making it green. That is darker. So the deeper areas get darker right up where it meets the dirt. So in this case, it's going to have a light dirt, tan colored dirt, and that's what I'm painting into the shallow areas, which is right up against the strips of land. And the deeper areas I paint a little bit darker. Okay, turn back on our reflection. Now it's still 100% opaque. And let's just make sure if there's any little gradation or something in my sky that it's also part of my reflection. And it looks like it was pretty much 100% opaque, so I didn't really need to do that step. But should there have been a little stray cloud or something up there, it would have been nice to reflect that in. Okay, so put those two together. So that's all together, the sky and the ground. I just grouped those and made a copy. So I'm going to give you this layered file as usual. So those at 100%, they're in there. The two separate, the one with the cleaned up edge and the sky. And then I merged them, threw on a little layer mask, and there we go. There's our Fresnel effect. All you have to do is uncouple those. You have to unlock them so you can move your gradation mask independent if you want to change the strength of the Fresnel effect. And it depends, there could be a bunch of like dust and dirt and debris floating on top of this, changing the quality of the water, making it a little less reflective. Also could be a little windy, and changing some of the strength of that reflection would also change in strength if the wind comes up. And I forgot a little rock, so I'm just adding that little reflection of the rock in the foreground. I'm going to add it to my reflection layer. And I don't want to merge that layer mask yet, so I'm just going to delete it first so I can merge those two together. So now they're all in one reflection layer, and I'll just redo the Fresnel effect. So there we go. And I'm going to adjust it a bit. So that is the Fresnel effect, and our reflection is becoming stronger as our line of sight becomes more tangent to that surface, which means stronger into the distance, and less reflective in the foreground, which allows us to see the water in the foreground and the water color more than in the background. In the background you see more of the sky covering, just like the photographs we've looked at. And what I'm doing now is I'm just lightening up and cleaning up the sand areas so that we can see it a little bit more clearly in the water, up next to the water. So I just hit preserve transparency on my architecture layer. Okay, and now I'm playing around. I doubled up my reflection. I put another one on top, and I'm playing around setting it to screen. I put another one on top here, putting it on multiply. That's if you just want to see and play around with the darks being very dominant versus the sky being dominant, tweaking your reflection a little bit. I think in the end I don't use either of them, but because the screen made the sky brighter than it actually was in reality. The reflection was brighter than the sky, so that didn't work. I was just trying to see if I get my darks even darker or more contrast between my architecture and the sky. But in reality, all you need is one layer, set to normal, and just throw on your gradated layer mask, and that's all it takes. So this is the case of doing any flat plane reflection, would be the same exact technique. I have a little smudging brush I'm using right now. It's a rake brush. It's like a bunch of little dots, and the little vertical row of dots is the brush shape. And so when I just squiggle this left and right, I'm able to put a little streaks like ripples in the water. It's one of the ways, of course, to bring a little life to it. So I'm basically introducing a little bit of wind or something, a little current or wind. But basically, it's almost glass. But obviously, this would show more if it was a more finished, illustration. But there's enough contrast in that reflection and enough edges there that works. Plus, you can open the file and have a look. Once it gets a little larger, it looks more convincing. Higher res on your screen. Okay, now I grabbed a custom brush, and I have a brush that's just a bunch of water ripples, and I just made that, which is just a bunch of kind of almost a little ellipse shapes, and I made like a little grouping of ripples. Excuse me. And just compressing that as it goes off into the distance. So you can see as I was painting in the background there, I just compressed my brush shape. So you see I have my brush tip shape open while I'm painting, and that allows me to change the shape of it. So I compress it when I want to make it more foreshortened into the distance, like there's a little bit of wind out there on that water causing those ripples. And then I'm painting the color of the sky and a dark green, and I'm alternating those two colors to do the front face of a wave and the back face of a wave, of a little ripple. So see, I went and picked the sky there. So I'm saying those ripples, my line of sight is going to bounce off those little waves up to the sky. So I'm bringing a little bit of that sky color into here to make it a little bit more irregular. Break it up a bit because the reflection is just a little too smooth. And then you can go and do dark ones too, because that's like we're seeing straight through the dark water as the face of those little ripples are more perpendicular to our line of sight. And now, of course, we have our layers set up properly. We can change the color independent of the reflection. So it's just like changing the base paint. So I'm just shifting it around, seeing is there anything more interesting, really just to demonstrate how you have full control because of your layer strategy. And I think I'm going to warm it up just a tick. I'm going to go with that, a little bit more yellowish. And the last touch will be to colorize just that little S-shape, more like a Z-shape strip of sand there, just so it makes sense with the water. And so you can see how I could take a grayscale and start to bring color into it quite easily. And so there we go, colorizing that a bit, just so it makes sense with those. That's the same color that's going down into the water, where it's very shallow, so we can actually see that color. And you could even start to colorize the rest of it. So here I'm colorizing my reflection a little bit, because that's a reflection of that little sandy hill right there. So it matches. That makes it look much more realistic. And so you could do that anywhere you want. You could colorize, just as an example, I wanted to colorize this wall, right? We could colorize that, keeping all the value structure the same, just using my brush set to color. And then we would go back to our reflection with preserve transparency turned on and just shift the color of the reflection. I don't particularly care for that, so I'm going to undo it. And this is wrapping it up. So that's how you do water. Hope you enjoyed it. So I look forward to seeing what you do. So have a great week and have a lot of fun.